Jake Smith for SevereMMA, and today I'm delighted to be joined by fellow Geordie and body language expert, Believe in Bruce. Bruce, we would be doing this face-to-face, but of course the pandemic means that we can't. How are you keeping, my friend?
Brother, I am good. Thank you for having me. It's the first time I've done it with you, so I'm really excited. And obviously helping SevereMMA out as well is an awesome opportunity. So thanks for having us, mate.
Yeah, not a problem, of course. I'm sure lots of our fans would have seen your videos already. You deep dive on these press conferences, look for little tells, look for body language, tells again, I guess, of big press conferences. Of course, we're going to look back at yesterday's press conference between Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier ahead of UFC 257 this weekend. The first thing I sort of want to touch on, I watched it as a fan and as a completely untrained eye, but Conor from the get-go seems like a very different person to the one that we're used to seeing at press conferences. The Cerrone one a little bit different, but even at the very start, getting up and shaking Dustin's hand. What did you take from Conor's attitude throughout the press conference?
Yeah, mate, it's a massive cerebral shift. He's in a different psychological state. And when I talked about it on my video yesterday, Jake, what I looked at is you look for someone's emotional baseline. So when you're trying to understand it now, fighters, coaches, they really need to get into body language observation, because you can train for 12 weeks, but if you know what really triggers your opponent, what we call stress reaction off, Mike Tyson called it the art of skullduggery. Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo is probably the best example of chronic stress application, is that you can see what triggers them. And if you can sort of hit that specific part of the engine with the right hammer at the right time, that could be so much more. Do all the sit-ups and sparring that you want, but if you can trigger the stressors off inside your opponent's head, then they enter the ring as if they've already done a round in their knackered before they even start fighting. That's the benefit of getting into body language and psychology, not just to improve your performance, but actually to improve theirs. Now, what we see with Conor is that he's almost done all that. He's earned his stripes, if you will. That's the way that I'm reading it. So he's done all the PR, he's done all the showbiz, he's done all the razzmatazz. He's got into their opponent's head. And like you say, with Poirier, for example, in the first fight, with Aldo, probably with all of his opponents to some extent, Eddie Alvarez definitely, he got into the head to a certain extent that he affected what I call the thinking, the feeling, put those two together, it impacted on the performance. Aldo went through that right hand when he shouldn't have threw that right hand. That's just an example there. Alvarez tried to strike with him when he had no chance of striking with McGregor, but he just wanted to beat him, all right? So that was Conor's approach back then. But what we see here is like Conor 2.0, the next evolution of McGregor. And where you can point that down to from a performance psychology point of view is that he's got the brand now, Jay. All right? He's got the brand now. He doesn't really have to do that. Like Conor McGregor is a fantastic fighter, and often someone's a bit like Fury, because their personalities are so big, it stops us from seeing how actually good a fighter they are. So Conor McGregor's done that. He doesn't feel the need to go there anymore. He can put that extra energy into actually just being the best fighter he can be, because it's the Conor McGregor show now. It's the experience. He's done all that. He's done his apprenticeship, and now the world admires Conor McGregor. So he can let that go. I wouldn't read too much into that from a confidence perspective, which is what I asked in my video yesterday. But what I do think is that this is just Conor focused on being the purest fighter he can be. So although from an entertainment perspective, I love the build-up, I love the crack, I love the banter, it adds excitement as the viewer, it could be very dangerous for the opponent that he's taking that energy that's usually put on the sort of PR campaign, the circus, and I'm just coming for you now. My only focus is to be the purest, best fighter I can be. So yeah, I'd be a bit worried if I was Poirier.
You mentioned that confidence, and of course in your video yesterday, it was very early on in the press conference, you saw the first tell, if you like, of Conor maybe regretting something that he said. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what the tell was and what that showed you as a body language expert?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So remember, with body language, you can't read anything specifically, because what we do as body language experts, I will pick up on a tell, right? A non-verbal cue, as we call it. And if it doesn't fit in with what the person's saying, I'll then ask further questions on that. And that's when you start to pry open what's really going on. So initially, we've already got that tell. But when the MMA reporter asked about, you said you were going to KO Dustin inside 60 seconds. Do you still stand by that? What we had was called a lip compression. All right. Now, I've done this in the past. You've done this in the past. The viewers will understand this as well. And a lip compression is when you see someone do this. They almost bite their lips together. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to stop something come out of the mouth or wish something hadn't come out of the mouth just in that particular second. That's what we call the T-junction. So the question was asked, Conor reacted. That's a body language tell. All right, we can lock that one in. He didn't do it before, he didn't do it after. At that particular time, that triggered something off in his hippocampus, an emotional part of the brain where it stores emotional memories, and we got the lip lock. So usually, Conor 1.0, let's call it, he would have been, yeah, you know, I mystic mark, I predict whatever happens. Of course, I'm going to knock him out inside 60 seconds. That would have been a normal response from Conor, you know, let's say pre-Cerrone, all right, pre-Cerrone, that's what we would have expected. But what we had now was that, and sometimes you'll see it's almost done with a twist of the head where they're sort of releasing some stress. But what you also see was Conor look down as well at that particular time. So that's a negative feeling, okay? Now, all we've got to go on is the lip compression. So he wants to say something, but he's holding it back, or he wishes he didn't say that. And then the look down, which is a negative association, all right? So you've got two things there. They actually, something went on in his head at that particular moment that made him feel uncomfortable. Now, it's not to say that he's scared of Poirier. It's not to say that he regrets what he said. But what we do know is that there was something going on where he wasn't as confident to say in that moment what he had previously said. Well, why is that? Could be a number of reasons. Could be the fact that he just sold it for the camera. Could be the fact that he actually just, you know, he did believe it at that particular moment. But now Poirier is there, and they seem to have a very amicable type, almost adulation relationship. Maybe he just feels a little bit awkward because he could still feel that he's going to knock out in 60 seconds, but he just feels bad for the guy that he's there and he's having to listen to this. So, but what we do know, there was a slight bit of doubt, slight bit of like, I'm not sure what I said before, but we don't know the reason why.
What did you take away from Dustin Poirier as well yesterday? We had a lot of fans commenting more or less straight after the press conference had finished saying Dustin seemed off. There was something not right. I know a couple of people said it might be a bad weight cut, but I think he seemed almost too compass mentis for a bad weight cut. I mean, we've seen it with Max Holloway in the past where slurring his words when he's trying to give an answer. It was as if he didn't want to be there. For me, as a non-expert, I think he looked a little bit startled and like he didn't almost know how to react to the new Conor. Is that, or what did you take away from it?
Sure. Well, first of all, you've got to understand the context here, Jake, all right? So the context is when you're fighting a fighter, it's a press conference. When you're in a press conference with Conor McGregor, forget everything else, all right? You've got the McGregor effect. The whole world is watching on you now. Even you as the other fighter may be in a slight state of, oh my God, I wish I was Conor. Look at all his stardom and all his money that he's got. He's a celebrity within a world of celebrities, if that makes sense, Jake. Okay. So when you've got somebody like Conor McGregor, it's a bit like Donald Trump and Melania, right? So when they come to the concourse, when they come to speak at the lectern, Melania always just stands back and just lets Donald take center stage because it's the Donald show, yeah? So she looks awkward. She doesn't know what to say because Donald is such an imposing character. Very good orator, etc., etc. We're not going to get into politics because it's not important here. But what I'm talking about is that you can directly impose that type of relationship on exactly what happens yesterday, or what happens generally with Conor McGregor in any press conference. Is Conor McGregor takes center stage. Conor McGregor takes control. Not many fighters are quick enough, witty enough, have got the verbal skills to be a fantastic orator like Conor is. That they often go into the shells because it's not about competing on a physical level. It's about competing on a mental and verbal level, like that verbal sort of jousting. I would say the only person who beats him, in my opinion, is Chael Sonnen. There hasn't been a fighter in the history of the UFC. I even would put Conor up against Muhammad Ali, like, who can actually go back and forward with him and hold him and handle his bobs. So it's normal, for example, Poirier to feel uncomfortable, to be in slightly awe. And also as fighters, a lot of fighters aren't good with the verbal stuff. That's why not a lot of fighters excel to the levels of Conor McGregor. Most fighters, like for example, Nick Diaz, terrible speakers. Like, you know, sometimes they can't get their words out. They struggle to communicate. But get them in the ring, they are poetry in motion. That's where their words are expressed with fists, you know, with fists, knees, and ankles, and feet, and elbows. That's how they speak. So for me, I wouldn't read too much into it. It was a normal, observable example of anybody when they're in the same area, especially as an opponent with Conor McGregor, Jake.
Do you think there's a possibility he was even caught out by Conor's almost killed him with kindness? I know when Conor mentioned the hot sauce and said about how good it was that Dustin was doing it, there was lots of stammering, lots of stuttering before he could start the sentence to come back at Conor with a compliment. Do you think that's maybe a sign of Dustin had perhaps prepared himself to get a load of shit off Conor, and then when it didn't come, he was left a bit wondering what was going on?
You know what? It would be a valid point, and it would be one definitely worth debating, because again, with the McGregor, I can't emphasize the McGregor effect. All right, it's different from a normal fight. This impacts how we think. It even sets off a thing called the amygdala, the sort of stress, the seat of fear within the brain. What's Conor going to do? How am I going to respond? And because the other fighter's thinking like that, Conor's holding the control of that situation. So whatever Conor does, like, he's the lead partner in the dance, he's swinging backwards and forwards, and the other people are just following them because they've got no idea where they're going, when they're going, or how they're going to react to it. So even though Conor was polite, so he was polite, he was gracious, it can still be unnerving because the other person just doesn't know what Conor's going to do. And how can I react to that? Add into the equation that Poirier is probably a nice guy, calm guy. He can have a chat like you or I, going backwards and forwards. And just that, what it is, nervousness about, I've got all the cameras on me, Conor's here, I know he can beat me verbally, so I'm not even going to start. Put all that together, that can be enough of what we call the variable stressors that impact on our ability to function, to think even in those critical moments. So me personally, I wouldn't read too much into what Poirier was doing, because it's not uncommon for a lot of people to act like that when you're surrounded by the McGregor effect, Jake.
Well, the last thing as well, Bruce, don't want to keep you for too long, take up too much of your time, but the old Conor McGregor, for me, again, it's a non-expert. I think there was one time that we've seen it really shine through a little bit more than it had throughout the press conference. And that was when Dana was asked about Khabib and wanting to come back and fight. Throughout the whole press conference, Conor had sat very still, of course, picking up the microphone when he was going to talk, but his hands were more or less like flat on the table. Or Khabib was mentioned in Conor, I believe he said something like, "We'll get him." And I just noticed after he said that, his hands started like he was almost fidgeting on the table. I mean, they've got such a checkered history, Khabib and Conor. We know that. Do you think that still shows that Conor's maybe not going to invite him for a pint down the pub anytime soon?
Yeah, so again, you've got to understand the context, right? So Conor McGregor is very narcissistic. He's very self-loving. He's all about Conor. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. When we talk about people who've got narcissistic tendencies, you look at any organization, any group, go back to anthropological times, if you look at caveman, whoever's top of the tree has been a narcissist, because without those self-driven tendencies, they wouldn't have achieved that position that they've got. So Conor McGregor wouldn't be the fighter that he is if he didn't give a monkeys for anybody else. And he has to be just interested in his own interest the majority of the time in order to achieve that position. So then what you've got now, a really good example, if I can give an example and then answer your question, is we had Masvidal with the BMF belt, yeah? And he got the quickest knockout ever against Askren. That really rattled Conor, all right? Conor didn't like the fact that someone was getting the adulation, someone else was being saying, "Oh, this is the baddest man on the planet," etc., etc. So I believe that's why when he fought Cerrone, now Cerrone's known as a slow starter. He admits it himself. He admits he comes in with all the nerves, etc. That really impacts him within that first round. If you go back and watch that start, I believe that's why Conor McGregor runs across the ring and tries to take him out with that huge punch that just misses him, because he wanted, it wasn't about beating Cerrone. He saw an opportunity to get the fastest knockout ever in the history of the UFC. That narcissistic tendencies. I want to show everybody who the man is. All right. When you understand Conor's personality, that becomes more of a realistic, oh, actually, that could probably work. It's not a bad thing. I'm just saying from his psychological profile, that's what it would look like. He ran across, boom, tried to throw that hand, he missed, because he was after that record. He was after saying to Masvidal and the world, I'm the man. All right. I am the BMF. I don't need any belt. So when it comes to Khabib, he's lost against Khabib. Yeah. That rattles somebody. Conor's a fighter, a competitor, as they all are within the UFC. In any fight game, let's not forget that. But what we then see with Conor is because Khabib's retired or may come back, Khabib's holding the control here, Jake. All right. It's totally within Khabib's power to say, I'll give you the rematch or not. All right. Conor's aware of this, and it's rattling him to some extent because he likes being in control of stuff. That's why he's got the where he is. He's a very successful guy, you know, and props to him. So when we see that rattling of the hands, that rattling of the hands, is that when that question's asked, to remember we talked about the T-junction, what's been said at that particular time and what does the body do? Generally within a fraction of a second. Remember, body language is autonomous. So that question's been asked. That's it. You know, that question is interpreted by the part of the brain called the thalamus. The thalamus and the amygdala working. There's a little bit of a threat there. That goes to the pituitary gland to the adrenal glands, and that adrenaline starts pumping. That's why we see the hands going like this. Conor's definitely up for fighting Khabib. Not necessarily just up for it. He needs it. He actually needs that fight. There's a desire within him. It's almost like an obsession that he needs to put that wrong right in his mind, not just for the competitive side of it, but for the Conor McGregor ego side. And again, when I say ego, it's not a bad thing. It's what helps people drive to be the best that they can be, Jake.
And wherever there's Conor, there's cameras. All week this week, just finally, what have you taken away from Conor this fight week?
I think Conor is a very dangerous opponent. I think he's in his zone, so what we call the individualized zone of optimum function, the sort of inverted U. He's definitely much within his sweet spot. I think the loss to Khabib could have been fantastic. I think the year out, you know, the enforced year out could have been very good because it seems to have lit a fire. You know, let's not forget he's the two-weight world champion, done it in Cage Warriors, done it in the UFC. Very, very driven individual, but we all need a why, all right? We all need a why to get up in the morning. And Conor's why seems to have shifted from dollars in the wallet and fame and fortune to actually, I want to be the best competitor. I want to be the best fighter. And I want to fight anybody who could potentially challenge me on that. That, for me, spells absolute fireworks on this weekend, mate.
Perfect. Bruce, before we go, where can SevereMMA fans find you? On all your social media.
MMA fans can find me on Believe in Bruce 360 on Instagram. That's where I tend to hang out if you want to ask me any questions. Find us on Twitter, Believe in Bruce, and also Believe in Bruce on YouTube, Jake.
Perfect. Bruce, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, sir.